Hello.
Hello. All right, and Conti, YouTube is streaming, just so you know. So we're live on YouTube, everyone.
Thanks. Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, Michael, we can hear you. Good. Thanks.
Great, thanks.
Hi, this is Julia Coster. Can you hear me?
Hi, Julia. Yes, we can hear
Hi.
you.
Thank you. That's exciting.
Welcome back, Julia. It's been a while.
Yeah. It's nice to be back. Thank you.
Hope your deputation was exciting.
It was indeed, but I am thrilled to just be back to one job rather than two.
Okay. Okay, I see Ms. Sabeski as well. Good morning. Ms. Sabeski, we are waiting for Mr. Allen. I'll just, yeah, I see Mr. Allen as well.
Hey, Conti, I'm here.
Thank you, sir. I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
All right, excellent. It's afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Charles Allen. I'm chair of the Transportation Planning Board. I'm going to call our TPB September 22nd, 2021 meeting to order. A couple of housekeeping things. As we continue meeting virtually during the pandemic, we will continue to do our live stream of the audio and video of this meeting on the internet as well as on YouTube. We will continue to monitor the personal and public health situation to determine when it would be best and safe to resume in-person meetings. At this time, I understand that COG has begun upgrading their technical devices to be able to host a hybrid meeting moving forward that will also allow for us to have both in-person and virtual participation. While we all are familiar with our process for these virtual meetings, for the benefit of those following the meeting online, I'll briefly review the procedures that we follow during our meetings. To start the meeting, I will ask staff to take a roll call of members or alternates to document your presence at this meeting and determine we've got a quorum. Then for the action items on the agenda, I'll have the presenter complete their briefings. We'll make a motion to approve and then seek a second for the motion made. Then I'll invite questions or comments in turn by jurisdiction before calling for a vote. For the vote, I will seek just the nays and abstentions and take the rest as yes votes. I'll call for the votes in turn by jurisdiction. For the informational items, I'll have the presenters complete their briefing and then invite questions in turn by jurisdiction. I do want to adhere to our schedule and hopefully we'll be on time. So I'll request all to be mindful of the time during your comments and questions. Lastly, as always, a friendly reminder to mute your microphones and importantly to unmute your microphone and state your name and jurisdiction when you do speak. So with that, let me turn to Lynn to help us take a roll call and make sure we've got a quorum to get started.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to call out your district or your name and your jurisdiction or your agency. If you could state your name, we'll record you. If I go too fast and you feel like I've missed you, we'll be monitoring the participant list. So we'll try to capture you that way. All right, let's get going with the District of Columbia. District Council, Ms. Pinto.
Hi, this is Ella Hansen, Councilmember Pinto's alternate.
Thank you. District Council, Charles Allen.
Here.
I got you. Thank you. District Council, Ms. Henderson or Mr. Maloney?
This is Mr. Maloney, Lynn.
Thank you. DC Office of Planning.
Kristen Culkins here.
Thank you. District Department of Transportation.
Anna Chamberlain here.
Great, thank you. Moving on to Maryland, City of Bowie. Charles County. Mr. Collins?
Present.
Thank you.
Present.
College Park.
President, Councilmember Denise Mitchell, alternate.
Great, thank you. Frederick County.
Jan Gardner, Frederick County Executive, present.
Thank you.
Mark
City of
Mishler,
Frederick.
alternate. Sorry.
Oh, great. Mark two. Gotcha too. Gotcha. Thanks. City of Frederick.
Kelly Russell, present.
Thank you. City of Gaithersburg.
Neil Harris is here.
Thank you. City of Greenbelt. City of Laurel. Montgomery County Executive.
Gary Ehrenrich is here.
Thank you. Montgomery County Legislative.
Evan Glass is here.
Thank you. Prince George's County Executive. Looking for Ms. Lasker. I'll check in. Prince George's County Legislative.
Hi, Danny Taveras. I guess things are back to being boring, huh?
Not unless you unboring them, Ms. Taveras. City of Rockville.
Bridget Donald Newton's here.
Thanks. City of Tacoma Park.
Casey Costick is here.
Thank you. Maryland House of Delegates. Maryland Senate. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Earl Lewis here.
Thanks, Earl. Moving on to Virginia, City of Alexandria.
Janet, present.
Thanks. Arlington County. Keep an eye out for them. City of Fairfax. Fairfax County.
Walter Alcorn here.
Thank
James
you.
Walkinshaw here.
Great, thank you. City of Falls Church. I'll keep an eye out for him. Just saw him at CPC. Fauquier County.
Adam Schellenberger, present.
Thank you. Loudoun County.
Kristen Umstadt, present.
Thank you.
Bob Brown, alternate.
Thanks, Bob.
Present.
City of Manassas.
Ann Sabeski, present.
Thanks. Manassas Park.
Jeanette Rischel here.
Thank you. Prince William County.
Ann Wheeler here.
Thank you.
Angry here.
Gotcha. Virginia House of Delegates.
Delegate David Reed is present.
Thank you. Virginia Senate.
Senator Dave Marsden here.
Thank you. Virginia Department of Transportation.
John Lynch here.
Thank you. WMATA. Federal Highway Administration. Federal Transit Administration. National Capital Planning Commission.
Julia Coster is here.
Hi, Julia. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. And National Park Service. That concludes roll call. We have a quorum.
Great, thank you very much, Lynn. I also, Jen, we received some public comments, which we have available on our website, but want to see if you could help summarize those for us, Lynn.
No problem. Yes, for the September 2021 TPB meeting, we received a total of 8 comments, which included 1 letter, 6 emails, and 1 phone call. A memo with a summary of the comments, as well as the comments themselves, can be found on our TPB event page. 7 of those comments were in reference to the Maryland I-495, I-270 Hot Lanes project. The Coalition for Smarter Growth submitted a letter stating that the region must significantly reduce per capita vehicle miles traveled and proposed 2 suggestions for how to do that. One was to perform an additional calculation on our climate change mitigation study. And the second was to use the results of that to establish VMT reduction targets. So as I mentioned, all comments are found on our meeting page. And so that concludes my report, Chair Allen.
Great, thank you very much, Len. All right, next up, start as always with a review and adopting of the minutes of our July 21st meeting. So I hope everyone's had a chance to review that in advance. So I'll make a motion to adopt the minutes of our July 21st meeting. And do I have a second?
Sabeski.
Thank you, Pam. All right, are there any corrections or comments on the meeting minutes before we move to a vote? For the vote then, just as a quick reminder, we're only voting nay or abstention. Your silence means that you are voting yes. So for the District of Columbia, any nays or abstentions? Maryland, Virginia, and WMATA and any other agencies. All right, excellent. Then our minutes are approved. Thank you very much. Next, we'll move to the technical committee report. Everyone should have a written summary of the September 10th technical committee meeting. I trust that everyone's had a chance to review that. In the interest of time, we're going to forego Jason's full briefing, but let me turn to see if there's any quick updates from Jason or any questions that he can respond to. Jason, I'll turn to you first if there's anything additional you wanted to add, and then I'll turn to questions by jurisdiction.
Nothing to add, Mr. Chairman. Happy to take questions.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the district? Any questions from Maryland?
Yeah, Chair Allen, this is Casey from Tacoma Park.
Yep, Casey.
I was just curious, it looked like there was a report on the vehicle characteristics data from registration, and I was curious if that was showing any significant increase in electric vehicles, or if that was something that showed up in that report.
My recollection was that it took a sort of a deeper dive. So over the broader scale, it was marginal, but certainly I believe TPB staff could provide that to you so you can see the details, go a little deeper on it. And if you have further questions, we're happy to go discuss it with you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Casey. Let me turn to Virginia and WMATA and any other agencies. All right, great. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate the work there. All right, then next we will turn to the Community Advisory Committee report. Everyone should have a written summary of the September 16th meeting. Elise, let me turn to you to see if there's anything that you wanted to add and note for us, and then I'll turn to questions by jurisdiction there. Not hearing anything there. So let me turn to see if there were any questions or comments here, and I'll go in reverse order now. So WMATA or any other agencies? Virginia? Maryland? And the District of Columbia? All right. Well, our thanks to the Community Advisory Committee for their report and review as well. Next, then, we turn to our steering committee actions and report from the director. We've got a written summary of the September 16th steering committee meeting and the director's report. But Conti, let me turn it over to you so that you can add a couple other items and things that you'd like to make sure we are noted here. And I'll turn to questions after that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have my written report, so I will not review all of the items. There is one item that is in the packet that I would like to bring to your attention, and three other items that are not in the packet. The item that's in the packet is the steering committee approving a letter, a joint letter by TPB, MVAC, and COG's Climate, Energy, Environment Policy Committee on the current federal administration's proposal to strengthen the greenhouse gas emission standards for passenger cars and light-duty trucks for model years all the way through 2026. This is going to be very important for reducing transportation sector's greenhouse gas reduction. So this is indeed something that we would support. So that's the joint letter. Earlier this morning, CPC met and they approved the letter as well. The three other topics, very briefly, that is not in the memo because some of them were late developing. One, members will recall that we initiated the Voices of the Region initiative as part of updating our long-range plan. One part of this initiative was seeking public comments specifically about our aspirational initiatives. We were trying to both raise awareness of these aspirational initiatives amongst the public, but more importantly, to gauge from them how any of these initiatives they see as actually having a meaningful impact in their lives. So that initiative just concluded end of August. We'll be bringing the results to you. We received a little more than 400 comments. So we are very happy with the feedback we received. The second item is that in this morning's COG's Climate, Energy, Environment Policy Committee held its monthly meeting, and Ms. Tavares chaired the meeting. I would say it was extremely informative, lots of knowledgeable people sharing their knowledge and experience. But the topic is what I would like to share with you. The topic was electrifying the vehicles within the transportation sector with a focus on transit vehicles, general passenger vehicles, but with a focus on transit vehicles as well. So TPB staff, which had just completed its work on doing an inventory of where all the various transit agencies in the region are in this initiative, they presented the results. We had excellent speakers from WMATA, from Alexandria's Dash on the panel. one of the takeaways, there were quite a few, one of the takeaways that stood in my mind is that there are opportunities to electrify transit buses. That's known, but how significant is the need to boost the resources that is available to these transit agencies, particularly to the smaller transit agencies, because it is not simply buying an electric bus, it is upgrading the infrastructure associated with operating, maintaining, and charging those buses. Very useful discussion today. And the last item is a copy of a letter, a joint letter from a number of transit agencies in our region, some local governments, some business groups, and some nonprofits. And COG is a signatory to this letter as well. This is a joint letter to this region's congressional delegation, and it's been added to the director's report packet on the website. The letter makes clear case that transitioning transit buses to clean fuel can indeed contribute to greenhouse gas reductions, but importantly, the letter clearly documents the significant resources needed by transit agencies to make it happen. So the letter calls on members of the Congress to continue to work with the Congress through the annual budget appropriation process to make funding available to help the transit agencies transition to electric or clean fuel buses. So that's a quick update, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Conti. Why don't I turn to see if there's any questions? We'll do that by jurisdiction. So let me first turn to the district if there are any questions for Conti following that. All right, let me turn to Maryland, Virginia, and WMATA and other agencies. All right, great. Thank you, Conti. Appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we'll jump, I guess the next agenda item is chairman's remarks. I'll be fairly brief, really. I think for a lot of us, I hope you've had a chance to take a little bit of time off this summer and be able to rest and recover with friends and family. We are in the district certainly focused a lot on our schools reopening and the things that are going right and the things that are still frustrating many of us. But it's nice as a dad to 2 elementary school kids myself to helping get those kids to school as we're gradually getting back into our in-person learning, beginning to cautiously reopen and re-enter our offices, and at the same time dealing with the Delta variant and all the uncertainties that still lie ahead. So I assume that all my colleagues are challenging and facing all those things at the exact same time. It has been a very active and interesting year for TPB thus far, a very active summer. I don't know if we're gonna be able to meet the level of excitement for the remainder of the year, but we will do our best to try. But I will say my appreciation to the TPB staff for helping really work hard to help navigate throughout the last few months. And as we look to finish this year, I know we can count on all of you, so I appreciate that. But also to my colleagues, as we have wrestled with some big issues and continue to work together, really thinking about our region. And so I appreciate all the hard work that has gone into that and really the really respectful collegial work, even when we have pushed and pulled on each other. I appreciate that as we continue to work our way forward. So here is a wishing for a very interesting yet perhaps less hectic remainder of 2021 for us. We're now going to move into our action items. So first off, we've got the Regional Car Free Day 2021 Proclamation. In case you didn't know, today was Car Free Day. So hopefully no one's driving around in a car right now. Since we changed the date of our regular monthly meeting, we are now taking up this item actually on Car Free Day. So first, let me have Nick Ramphos get us started, and then I'm going to actually call for a vote to proclaim today as Car Free Day. And then I have a incredibly oversized proclamation, should this vote be successful, that I get to sign on camera, which was one of the most secure packages that has ever been delivered to my house. But it's sitting here and it's ready. So hopefully all of that effort does not go to waste and we'll approve this. But Nick, let me turn to you and then we'll do some questions and take that action.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and happy Car Free Day, everyone. So just wanted to give folks some background. We have a presentation. I don't know if that's up, but so Car Free Day, just to give you a little bit of a background, if we go to the next slide, it started in Europe back in the mid-1990s and it went global in the early 2000s, and it's now celebrated in 40 countries around the world. Next slide. And these are just some of the photos from some of last year's events around the world. Next slide. And the event does coincide with European Mobility Week, and it's an annual campaign that's held in several countries all around Europe to promote sustainable transportation measures. Next slide. And it all culminates with Car Free Day, which is today. And a lot of the cities in these European countries do set aside areas for pedestrians and cyclists and public transportation for the whole day. Next slide. We do get a lot of media coverage, although this past year, because of the pandemic, we didn't get as much, but some of that is picking up for this year. Next slide. And the event began here in 2007 in the District of Columbia and it went regional in 2008. And essentially what we're looking to do is to promote alternative forms of transportation, which includes transit, bicycling, using scooters, walking, and of course working from home, and also car light methods such as carpools and vanpools. Next slide. Car Free Days for everyone, and essentially we're looking to get folks who ordinarily travel by themselves, whether it's for work, to do an errand, or to go to school, to try something different. And our pledge goal for this year is 5,000 individuals in the region. Next slide. We also partnered with Clean Air Partners to promote the event, as well as with the American Heart Association this year. And both of those organizations are helping us get the word out regarding Car Free Day. Next slide. We have a website. It's carfreemetrodc.org. Next slide. As well as a leaderboard, which shows all of the various modes that folks signed up to pledge for. And this year, not surprisingly, telework and walk and bike are leading all of the modes, but we do have a fair amount of folks who are taking bus and train, as well as carpools. Next slide. We also have promotional materials. We sent posters out to employer sites, as well as all of our local jurisdictions, to help promote the event. Next slide. And we're also using Facebook and Twitter to get the word out about the event. Next slide. As well as paid social media through YouTube and Instagram. Next slide. We've also partnered with some of our media outlets to put digital ads out into the public. Next slide. And we have a number of sponsors who have partnered with us to promote the event and to offer gifts and prizes to the participants. Next slide. And these are just some of the prizes: Capital Bike Share, Giant. We also got passes from VRE. Next slide. We also have some radio support with our media partners in the region to promote the event. Next slide. We're also using digital media through Spotify. Next slide. And then we've also partnered with all the local jurisdictions, so with Arlington County, Prince George's County, Metro, Fairfax Connector, and Montgomery County Ride On to essentially get transit signage up on their vehicles to promote Car Free Day. And this is just an example from Ride On that you see in this slide. Next slide. We also did a native article through Popville to promote the event, and that got a lot of hits and interest from the public. Next slide. And I think the most important thing is our relationship with our local jurisdictions, and there have been many events that have been occurring throughout the region. In La Plata, there was a farmer's market where Tri-County Council for Southern Maryland had giveaways and prizes, and they had staff there. Arlington County staff coordinated an event called Our Shared Street, and that was at Central Place Plaza, where participants were able to try out mobility stations and discover ways to enhance their travels around the county. And there were also giveaways and prizes at that event. And then in Prince William County in the city of Manassas, participants were encouraged to take the pledge and then play an Omni-Ride Car-Free Day bingo for great prizes. And then the staff were also at an event at the Manassas Farmers Market. And in Prince George's County, Ride Smart staff were on hand at 7 separate events over the course of the last week or so. And they were looking to educate the public about Car-Free Day and get them to pledge and register. Next slide. We also have partnered with all of our local universities and colleges to have a Car-Free Day College Campus Challenge. As you can imagine, this year, much of the focus has been on getting students back into the classroom. So our reception wasn't as, I would say, wasn't as exciting. Folks weren't as excited to participate this year, but we do have many of the colleges on board, and so we'll see where that all goes. And we will recognize the winner of that challenge, and the winner is the college that's going to have the most students and faculty pledging to go car-free or car-light today. Next slide. And today you're being asked to approve a regional proclamation. We've also had several jurisdictions throughout the region adopt proclamations, including Charles County, the city of Fairfax, the city of Frederick, city of Manassas, and the Prince William County Board of Supervisors. I will also point out that the original proclamation that had been posted was changed. There was a wordsmith change. The word citizens was changed to those who live and work in the region. So just wanted to point that out. There were two sections, and I would like to thank Casey Kostick for that change. So that's reflected in your document today. Next slide. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks so much, Nick. I think I just saw a note as well. Bridget Newton just sent a note in the chat that the city of Rockville did as well. So.
Oh, great, thank you.
Yeah, and we just finished passing Prince George's County also a resolution on it as well.
Okay, wonderful.
Excellent. And City of Tacoma Park, thank you, Casey. All right, everybody's getting on. This is fantastic. So let's see if there's any questions here for Nick first, and then I will make a motion to proclaim September 22nd, 2021 as Car-Free Day. So are there any questions, or if there are jurisdictions that took action that we missed, let's make sure we note that as well. But so I'll turn to the district first. All right, and to Maryland. And to Virginia. And WMATA and any other agencies. All right, then let me make a motion to proclaim September 21st, 2021 as Car-Free Day. Is there a second?
Kelly Russell will second.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Give it to Kelly because she bikes.
Kelly, the city of Frederick.
Thank you, Kelly. City of Frederick with a second. All right, excellent. All right, so we're gonna do the jurisdictions where we do the only the nays or abstentions so we can record this vote. So to the district, any nays or abstentions? Maryland, Virginia, WMATA, any other agencies? All right, it passes unanimously. Is this the time when I have to confess that I did get in a car earlier today already? But I'll try not to get in a car again later, maybe. All right, well, thank you. So now, Nick, I get to sign this massive proclamation on camera. Great. So yeah, I will say I've never seen a package delivered so securely. I had to have multiple pairs of scissors to break this thing out of its packaging. But for everyone, I'll try to see if I can see. We have a very large proclamation here. I'm going to sign right here. It's got several whereas clauses that I think everyone has seen. But again, it's multiple really good whereases that Nick kind of walked us through. Be it resolved that proclaims Car-Free Day throughout the Washington metropolitan region to be observed on Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021. Encourages citizens to take that pledge to be car-free or car-light. at carfreemetrodc.org and acknowledges TPB members, jurisdictions who've adopted similar proclamations in support of Car Free Day 2021. So I will now sign this. There we go. That felt so fulfilling. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
And seriously, thanks to the staff that helped pull all that together. That's in a virtual world. We're doing our best. So I really appreciate you guys doing that and taking the effort to get it here. All right. So with that, let's turn to our next agenda item, which is number 8, transit within reach. I think this is an important and exciting action item coming up. It is a new grants program to help us move inspiration to implementation, specifically making high capacity transit more accessible by walking and connecting the station to the community that's around it. I'm going to have Nicole brief us on the program and the projects being recommended. Then I'm going to call for a motion to approve the recommendation of the selection committee. There's no resolution to adopt here, but let me turn to Nicole for this. Nicole?
Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce our newest technical assistance program, Transit Within Reach, and present the first round of funding recommendations. This program will focus on helping people walk and bike to or from a bus station, train station, or other transit. Next slide, please.
Nicole, we may have to speak up a little bit.
Can you hear me now? Can you all hear me and confirm you can hear me?
We can hear you, Nicole. It sounds like it's just a little bit lower volume. So I don't know if there's a way to either bring the mic maybe a little bit closer or turn volume up.
I'll see what I can do.
That's actually better.
Soft voice, so
Yeah,
thank
that
you.
actually improved it. Thank you.
All right, so let me start over again. It is my pleasure to introduce our newest technical assistance program. I've been working on this for over a year now. I'm really pleased to share with you today our recommendations for the first round of funding recommendations for this. The program will focus on helping people walk and bike to or from a bus stop, a train station, or other transit. Can you go to the next slide, please? As you know, a significant number of jobs and households are close to transit. And over the next decade, more than half of the region's job growth and over 40% of new households are forecast to be within a half-mile of our high-capacity transit stations. Yet, even where transit is physically close, it often is not within reach for people who walk and bike. I know you are aware that there are sidewalks that are missing, there are crosswalks that are unsafe, trails and paths that are yet to be built. Barriers to walking and biking cause many people to drive their cars, even if they live or work close to transit. But others who depend on transit are often forced to use circuitous routes or navigate unsafe conditions when they walk or bike to transit. As a region, we have confirmed the importance of walk and bike access to transit. It is one of the 7 regional initiatives outlined in Visualize 2045. The Visualize plan said that investments to improve non-motorized access to transit should be considered regionally significant because beyond local circulation needs, they also improve access to regional transit systems. Last year, the TPB approved a list of 49 transit access focus areas, TAFAs, which we determined are high priority locations for improving access to transit. These are places with deficiencies in the existing walk sheds around stations, as well as the presence of latent demand for walking and biking. Next slide, please. And we are now sharpening our focus on this issue with this new technical assistance program, Transit Within Reach. The first solicitation for this program was conducted over the summer, and in a few minutes, I will share the selection panel's recommendations and request your approval. This program is part of the suite of technical assistance that we currently offer to local governments, which also includes the Transportation Land Use Connections Program and the Regional Roadway Safety Program. The goal of this program is to move small, high-impact projects that improve walk or bike access to transit into preliminary design or engineering, and to help get them closer to construction and implementation. The program is funded by the UPWP Technical Assistance Regional Transit Account. Next slide, please. $250,000 was contributed for the first round. The application solicitation period ran from May 3rd to July 1st, with optional abstracts due May 18th. We received 6 applications, and to be clear, we are offering short-term consultant services, not direct financial assistance. Projects are to be completed in about 12 months. The solicitation will be repeated every other year so that we have a little bit of time to reflect and fine-tune the program in the future. Next slide, please. Here are the program priorities. Improve bike ped access to high-capacity transit, which includes metro rail, commuter rail, light rail, streetcar, and bus rapid transit. And in particular to our transit access focus areas, our high-priority locations for improving access to transit. Increase transit ridership and or utilize available ridership capacity. Improve access for low-income communities and communities of color. Demonstrate collaboration with other agencies or jurisdictions, and demonstrate strategies to advance the project to construction. Next slide. The selection panel included the chair of the Regional Public Transportation Subcommittee, Deanna Archie, the chair of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Subcommittee, Jamie Carrington, and 3 TPB staff, Charlene Howard, John Swanson, and me. The panelists scored each application relative to the program priorities and assessed the projects before a consensus building meeting. In developing their recommendations, the panelists considered transit modes, various needs across the regions, and equity. Next slide. Before I share the recommendations, I want to take a moment and thank the staff at each of the jurisdictions who applied to the program. Each application affirmed our aspiration to improve walk and bike access to transit. In addition to the program priorities, the selection panel also considered whether or not the project was ready for preliminary design and engineering, if the tasks outlined in the applications can be completed in a year, if the project is likely to proceed to construction, and more. The 3 applications that the selection panel recommends for funding are all in transit access focus areas and will improve walk and bike access to high capacity transit. A clear case was made that these access improvements will attract more riders as well as improve access for low-income communities and communities of color. 2 projects are within equity emphasis areas. These applications also demonstrate commitment and strategies to advance these projects to construction. Next slide, please. The selection panel recommends $74,000 be awarded to the City of Manassas for the preliminary design for a new shared use path connection within the Broad Run Transit Access Focus Area. This project will tie in with a VRE Broad Run expansion project, which is in final design. Right now, the Broad Run station can only be accessed from the south. The Broad Run expansion project will provide a new platform access north of the railroad tracks, as well as a multimodal parking facility and pedestrian tunnel to access the platform. The Transit Within Reach project, our project, will provide the last missing link for the safe and direct bicycle and pedestrian access from the city to the new access to the platform from the north. $85,000 be awarded to Montgomery County for preliminary engineering of the Walter Johnson Road shared use path connection to the Germantown MARC station. The Germantown MARC station has the highest ridership along the Brunswick line in Maryland. Because most riders arrive by car, ridership growth is currently constrained by parking availability. The project will provide an alternative to driving, a low-stress east-west walk and bike connection between the station and nearby commercial and residential areas. The path will also connect to separated bike lanes currently in place on Middlebrook Road. Together, these improvements will make it more appealing to walk or bike to the station for those located within a reasonable distance. $85,000 be awarded to Prince George's County for the Suitland Silver Hill Neighborhood Pedestrian and Bike Access Improvement Project. This project will develop 30% designs for safe pedestrian, bicycle facilities, and traffic calming connecting the neighborhood along Navy Day Drive, Navy Day Place, and Glen Drive to the Suitland Metro Station. Nearly a quarter of the households in the project area do not have access to a car, and the neighborhood lacks infrastructure to support safe walk access to the station. Planned improvements include traffic calming elements, new sidewalk, and more. For each of these projects, the Transit Within Reach program will fund preliminary design plans, a survey, and cost estimate for the final design and construction. Next slide, please. Today, staff requests approval of the selection panel's recommendations to fund these projects. Once approval is granted, we will begin the consultant selection process. Our goal will be to kick off the projects in January and complete them by the end of the year. I would like to take a moment to thank the members of the selection panel. Each member brought unique perspectives on the projects and better informed the decision-making process. I would also like to thank Mark Phillips with WMATA, who helped develop the vision for this program. That concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. All right, so just to confirm here, I'm going to turn if there are any questions for Nicole, but just to confirm what we need to do, we need to make a motion to approve our Transit Within Reach technical assistance projects after we go through questions. Is that right, Nicole, just to make sure? Okay, great. All right, so then let me turn to our jurisdiction, see if it has any questions for Nicole. Then after that, I'll make the motion to approve them. So any questions for Nicole from the district? From Maryland? From Virginia?
Mr. Chair, Kristen Umstadt,
Yep.
Loudoun County. One question for Nicole, and maybe we can touch base after the meeting. You had mentioned that there is inadequate parking, and when there's inadequate parking near transit, people tend to stay in their cars. I intend to support all three projects, but will the MARC project in any way increase parking opportunities or expand the area in which people could park?
Thank you for asking that question. It's a good question. This project is really just focused on developing the shared use path that will provide folks with a safer alternative to driving to get to that station. So they would not need to try to use that limited parking that is available there.
All right.
I do not recall any mention of increasing parking at the station as part of the application for this.
Do you think that this shared use path will allow people to park on residential streets or in office parking lots and use the shared use path to get to the station?
Good question. As the application was prepared, it was primarily focused on connecting folks from nearby commercial and residential land use and buildings.
Okay, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Ms. Umstead. Any other questions for Virginia? Mr. Glass, did I see your hand just go up?
You did. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the previous question and comment from Ms. Umstadt. And so just following up on that regarding particularly the Germantown MARC project, but applicable to all of these. So with these improvements, clearly trying to get more utilization from people walking, biking, using other means to these transit modes. Is there a component to this funding for that public education or new signage, or will that be incumbent upon the local jurisdictions to help elevate these new accessible ways?
That's another great question, and I'm reflecting on I think it's the 3 E's: engineering, education, encouragement, also enforcement. I think there's some.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I don't think we can hear you very well.
Let me see, is this any better?
That's a little bit better. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you everyone for nodding. As you asked that question, I was reflecting back in graduate school, and I think it was the 3 or the 4 E's: engineering, enforcement, education, and I believe there was another one in there. This program, honestly, it is designed, it's just the preliminary design and engineering that it is providing. But certainly, as we are trying to encourage as well as provide people with safe alternatives to driving, all of those elements are important.
Absolutely. So components of the project for future consideration as it moves forward. Excellent.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Glass. All right, were there any other, I think I had not gotten to WMATA or any other agencies. Let me see if there were any other questions for Nicole. All right, and not hearing any other then. Let me make the motion then to approve the Transit Within Reach Technical Assistance Projects. And let me see if there is a second.
Second, Pam Smith.
Thank you, Pam. All right, then we'll do how we've done this again, only asking for nays and abstentions. So let me call the vote. WMATA or any other agencies? Virginia? Maryland? And the District of Columbia. All right, then I believe that that passes now. Thank you, Nicole, for the presentation and helping answer some of those questions. All right, next we are going to move to item number 9 on our agenda as we move into our information items. Most recently, there was a COG board retreat, and so we are very glad to welcome Chuck Bean, the Executive Director of COG. Chuck, I understand you're going to help walk through some exciting news to share with us that relates to some of the board's previous work and also showcases the partnership of COG and the TPB. And I think, though, I'm going to turn to Conti first, though, because Conti, you're going to kind of tee up Chuck's presentation for us, right?
Yes, yes, Mr. Chair. This is, as you said, really an exciting development. You'll remember that one of the TPB goals, or a planning priority, if you will, has been to increase transit ridership as a means to reduce congestion, improve mobility, reduce per capita VMT by bringing jobs and housing closer together, all of which contributes also to reducing ozone and greenhouse gas emissions. So to further this planning priority, the TPB had done some work over the past few years of identifying the locations where high capacity transit stations are planned to be operating by 2030. And there are 225 such locations in our region, or will be there by 2030, just 10% of the region's landmass. So, and these are not just metro stations. Commuter rail is part of it, light rail is part of it, streetcars, BRTs are part of it. So the COG board sees this work in a much larger light. And in fact, it sees it as a strategy to build transit-oriented communities all around the region that can help achieve not just transportation goals, but also other regional goals, whether it is in housing or climate change or overall economic development. Another TPB work that was done a couple years ago is the identification of equity emphasis areas in the region. Members will remember these are census tracts where there is a higher than average concentration of low income and racial and ethnic minority populations. 350 of the 1,200 census tracts in the region have been designated as equity emphasis areas. COG board is very interested in this work, and they see this as being useful, not just in transportation planning, but in planning a whole host of other things, whether it is housing, health, climate change, public safety, that sort of thing. So the COG leadership retreat that took place in July, they discussed both of the high capacity transit station areas and the equity emphasis areas. And they had a very interesting take on it, something that would point to a unified planning construct, if you will. So I'm going to turn it over to Chuck. He can more eloquently summarize what the discussion has led to, and really, which is adopting a regional resolution. So Chuck, hopefully I've set you up. Thanks.
Thank you, Conti. And Chair Allen, can you hear me okay? Very good. If you could turn to the next frame. I want to acknowledge some of the board members that are active both on the COG board as well as TPB, COG Vice Chair Dorsey and Mr. Collins and Ms. Gardner and Ms. Newton and Ms. Wheeler, Mr. Snyder. So folks, if I miss something, I hope that you'll pitch in. I think this is the nexus: housing and transportation, climate and transportation, land use and transportation, and equity throughout all the work that we do. So as a little background, 2019, COG board set housing targets for the region. And this in part was based on work that was done in TPB in 2018. Mayor Newton will remember aspirational initiative of bringing housing closer to jobs. So if you click on the housing, that was in 2019. In 2020, COG Vice Chair Dorsey remembers that the COG board set a goal for 2030, 50% greenhouse gas reduction for the region. President Biden, about 6 months later, set that same goal for the country. So the two I'm going to be talking about in the next 10 minutes or so are the next high capacity transit station areas. From my lens, more of the land use and optimizing the land use around high capacity transit station areas, much in the flavor that Nicole talked about with the Transit Within Reach program. And then equity emphasis areas and elevating equity emphasis areas throughout all the work that we do. So I'm giving you all the punchline first. This is our Fab Four. These are our four cornerstones. These are the things that we'll be depending on to provide a compass as we think about our work together over the next decade. So now that I've given you the punchline, I'm going to back up a little bit. Next slide, please. Just a little bit more on some of those details. Again, the housing targets in 2019, we said that 320,000 more units were needed in the next decade. Now, we had forecasted 245,000, so an additional 75,000 of what was reasonably forecasted was needed. So 75,000 more, 75% of those units near high capacity transit and regional activity centers, and 75% affordable to low and middle income households. The Climate, Energy, and Action Plan and the environmental goals, again, reduce 50% by 2030. That's 50 by 30. Transportation goals epitomized by Visualize 2045. So it's a little bit of context setting. Just a little definition on one of our emerging terms. Next slide, please. All right, he's going to be bringing up our transit-oriented community slide. And we are saying TOC more than we're saying TOD. So C, emphasizing that the end goal of this work is communities. The end goal is not development. And while a hallmark of TOD over the last quarter century has been mixed use, we're increasingly emphasizing mixed use and mixed income. That references the housing goal. And while a hallmark of TOD has often been the half-mile walkshed, we're thinking now how to extend that optimization. What does the mile radius look like? The 2-mile radius, particularly as we look at disruptive technologies that can help people get to and access these high capacity transit. So let's go to the next slide, talking about some of the co-benefits. Just starting at the top, better access to jobs, services, and communities. Again, going back to Visualize 2045, bringing housing and jobs closer together. I don't know that we're there yet with COG orthodoxy, but we're talking more and more about what does this 15-minute community mean to get all that you need. So I think we're going to be looking at that over the next few years. That's what we mean by better access. If housing and jobs are closer together, if access to amenities are closer together, we get good environmental outcomes. So these are some of the co-benefits, and let's go drill down into the high capacity transit station areas. So 150 are here right now, 150 that we need to optimize. And in the plans that you have previously approved, there's an additional 75 high capacity transit station areas in the plan. So a total of 225. So when I talk to groups of developers, I say, here's your acupuncture chart. Here's where you need to look. It's just 10% of the region's land mass, but 55% of the new job growth is going to be happening in those areas. 42% of the region's new household growth. And I think as COG members, all don't necessarily share WMATA station. WMATA is, at the heart of this, 90-some stations. But I want to emphasize in this next decade how we can optimize MARC and VRE stations, Purple Line, and the new kid on the block, BRT, Bus Rapid Transit, Embark Richmond Highway, BRT in Montgomery County. all fit within our definition of high capacity transit. So the key verb that we've been working on is optimize. What's it mean to optimize? If you could go to the next slide. TPB has been working on high capacity transit, and the baton to COG board more focused on land use around high capacity transit, developing a regional consensus on optimizing, again, in that half mile, in the mile, so that we can prioritize planning investments, optimize the land use, not just mixed use, but also mixed income. An example of an initiative that's come out of this board, National Capital Trails Network, thinking about optimizing not just the half mile, but optimizing the bike shed. And Conti and crew can give you lots of statistics about the overlap between high capacity transit station areas and the potential for a National Capital Trail Network. A map is on the next slide. So the cup is half full. That is almost half of it is built. And I think a reasonable mandate or request to staff in the future is, Mr. Srikanth, as we think about building out the next and prioritizing, of course, feasibility, of course, utility to the whole network, but priority around connecting high capacity transit and what we're going to get to in just a couple minutes, prioritization around connecting equity emphasis areas. I'm going to use that as my transition. Both boards last year had important resolutions, a commitment to equity. In context, Region Forward, probably COG's most classic regional framework. There were 4 words: prosperity, accessibility, livability, sustainability. Easy to remember because the acronym is PALS. We elevated equity as part of that pantheon of things that we're striving for. So fundamental value of equity, and we're looking to weave it through all of our plans and programs. So a little bit of our thinking, what does that mean to weave it through all of our programs and elevate equity? Next slide, please. Primarily as a regional planning organization, we need to take a deep dive into the geography, connectivity of the region. I think you've heard before from staff, one of the predictors of economic mobility, of course, is education, but it's also physical mobility. So making that connectivity. So the high opportunity areas, that's a term we're hearing more and more often associated with high capacity transit. How do we link these areas, these census tracts? So over the last 3-4 years, we've taken a deep dive into the region's 1,200 census tracts, methodology that the TPB has developed to identify 350 of those 1,200 census tracts as equity emphasis areas. I think it's about on page 152 of the board packet where you'll find more information about the methodology as well as the list of equity emphasis areas. It's important to note that 30% of the region's population reside in these 350 equity emphasis areas. Can't move on equity unless we're focusing on these areas, unless we're connecting these areas. So I think from a transportation perspective, this is where it originated with TPB, part of the environmental justice analysis of looking at the long-range plan, these identification of these areas. But we're elevating this into all of our work. So let's go to the next slide. Converging with that transportation analysis was work that the COG board did through its Chief Health Officers Committee in 2019, commissioned VCU to do a social determinants of health analysis of all the census tracts in the region. The report is called Uneven Opportunities, and staff, if you could provide a link to that report in the chat. So beyond health and beyond transportation, next slide. Challenge to staff is to weave in this equity analysis through all of our disciplines. So we've been beginning to weave it through our environmental analysis. So the Climate and Energy Action Plan calls for sustainable energy access. Well, also emerging as we look at the effects of climate change, overland flooding. So parochially known as the 100-year storms that seem to be coming every couple of years now. We're used to river flooding, but the overland flooding, and I think we can do a geographic analysis about who's impacted. who's impacted with these heat islands, who's impacted with these overland flooding. And when I say who, I mean these geographies. Is there a disparate impact between these 350 equity emphasis areas and the rest of the region? So next slide, please. COG board is considering its second resolution or at the COG board meeting in October to elevate equity emphasis areas into all the work that we do. There's a first read of the high capacity transit station areas resolution in September. So final vote is expected on that, as well as the equity emphasis areas at the COG board meeting in October. Next slide, please. So at the COG board retreat, very interesting dialogue with elected officials about the nexus between optimizing these high capacity transit station areas, so accessibility to transit, accessibility to opportunity, and elevating these 350 census tracts. So putting a region of 5.7 million people on one single map, it's hard to find all those census tracts, but it's all available. It's in the board packet. And there, if you take that link that's listed on this page, you can spend days looking at the data and the nexus, again, between high capacity transit access and equity emphasis areas. Just one example, take our largest jurisdiction in the region, Fairfax County. On the left, you see the plot of the high capacity transit station areas. North, Silver Line and Orange Line. Center, you see VRE. And lower, you see the plans for bus rapid transit going down Richmond Highway. You see the next on the right is the census tracts designated as equity emphasis areas. And one note, if it looks like a large census tract, that's because it's less densely populated. And a tighter census tract means it's more densely populated. So you see, you can kind of eyeball the opportunities as the Silver Line builds out to connect equity emphasis areas. You see the census tracts along Richmond Highway and the opportunities and challenges as Fairfax embarks upon that BRT initiative. All this data is there for you and your staff. Next slide, please. So going back to where I started, Conti and I share this terminology, unified planning framework. Internally, again, I might call it the Fab Four, the four that we're focusing on. I think there's an opportunity here for TPB leadership. If you want to consider similar resolutions for TPB to consider to make sure that we're finding as much synergy as possible. My hope is that you'll find that COG and TPB over the last few years have been increasingly more holistic, more comprehensive, and more integrated across these planning disciplines. Again, starting with the housing targets, transportation, and housing. You know, we had a retreat in 2018. The context was that the biggest economic development contest in history had been launched in Amazon HQ2. It was down to 20 around the country, and 3 of those sites were in our region. So we thought, this is a possibility. And we invited the Director of Transportation from Seattle to share lessons learned about transportation. And this Director of Transportation ended up talking mostly about housing. So between Visualize 2045 and that learning from Seattle led to a year's of work with housing planning directors on the housing targets. Love to talk more about the regional climate goals, but I think you have a deep dive speaker coming up right after me. But as TPB looks at transportation and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, COG board will also be looking at the built environment and energy resources. No sector can do it alone. Every sector is going to have to do a lot to achieve those goals. Optimizing high capacity transit, we're going to be keeping on looking what kind of tools that we can provide to optimize land use around that transit. And equity is the cornerstone of the Fab Four. So, Mr. Chairman, right before I turn it back to you, I want to thank Conti, because if I've said anything remotely intelligent today, it's likely to have emanated from Conti. It's just my desire to fuse these things across disciplines that we're getting the most that we can for the benefit of the region. So, Mr. Chairman, happy to answer questions.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Chuck. Really appreciate you walking us through that with your Fab Four. I think I'm going to turn to, we'll do kind of questions again by jurisdictions. I will add my thanks to the COG leadership and board members for the work on this. And of course, as we know, there is some overlap between some of those individuals that also serve here on TPB. So my thanks specifically to them as well. I do think it's a big deal. I think sometimes in the world of, planning documents and all that, the excitement sometimes doesn't really come through, right? But I do think this body spent a lot of time working on aspirational goals and really trying to lay out a strong vision. On my screen, I'm looking at Mayor Newton, who helped lead that effort with TPB, but so many of my colleagues that helped push there. And then to see those pieces then get reflected in a larger plan. And I know I sometimes get frustrated at the pace of planning, but if it's not in a plan, you rarely see it actually be implemented. I think that's where there's a lot of value here. I would, one question I did have for you, because you mentioned it within your comments here. I do think the general public sometimes certainly doesn't quite understand the nexus or lack thereof sometimes. Like, what is TPB, what is COG, and sometimes what are they different and where do they come together? And you mentioned also the idea of perhaps the TPB should consider something that helps bring further alignment, in a formal way, either through endorsing COG's resolution, perhaps even doing our own. So Chuck, if you could just kind of expand on that just a little bit more, I think would be helpful. And then what I'll do is turn to jurisdictions for some specific questions.
Great, thank you. I think the way that I talked to my neighbor about the housing targets, boy, they're employers that have job openings. But if the housing that's affordable to that worker is 2 hours away, that's tough. It's tough for the worker and tough for the employer. So that's what we're talking about bringing housing closer to jobs. So you can pick it up from a transportation lens or a housing equity lens, but it's the same thing. We want to have people have a more enjoyable life, closer to opportunity. That's what we talk about with housing targets. I think I particularly strive for quantifying some of these things to try to make these messages sticky. So we need 75,000 more units in this big region than we've already forecasted. Climate goals, 50% reduction by 2030. 225 nodes on this acupuncture chart of high capacity transit station areas that we need to optimize. And 350 census tracts that we need to make sure are included in all of our work.
Thanks, Chuck. And then just real fast because I want to make sure that as a board, we're clear on kind of what you were recommending us considering. Is there value in TPB in either in a formal way, passing a resolution in support of COG's work, or would it be that TPB should pass its own resolution that also just has some synergy to it? Or either of those two could, might be a good idea, and it's maybe up for TPB to figure out which is the best.
I think the former would be the most straightforward, unless there's a particular spin that TPB would put on it. But I think the message is optimizing transportation, and the land use is actually a transportation strategy. And some of these land use discussions are beyond the purview of TPB, and that's why COG board wants to pick it up. I think there's been discussion amongst COG board members about taking these resolutions and thinking about a local manifestation, identifying these high capacity transit and elevating these census tracts known as equity emphasis areas. So I think the most straightforward, Mr. Chairman, would be to consider perhaps at your next board meeting also endorsing these resolutions, unless there's a preference to put an additional twist on it.
Okay. All right, that's helpful. Thank you. Let me turn to, we'll go by jurisdictions to walk through if there's any specific questions or comments here. I'll turn to Virginia next. I thought I saw Mr. Dorsey, you put your hand up, but I think there's a few hands going up here. So I'll do my best. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just want to really echo Chuck's presentation, at least from the perspective of knowing that a lot of folks are often, as you mentioned, Mr. Allen, looking to figure out what's the tangible output of all of the work that we do. And, you know, I think that really very much guided the unified planning framework to figure out how we take our great work and actually have follow through as the outcome. Not that we weren't pursuing that before, but we want to have a pretty clear, tangible way of delivering outcomes in an effective way, and recognizing that looking at these in isolation while having merit, the amazing amount of synergy, as Chuck described it, that comes from looking at them from an integrated capacity is going to produce much better results. So I would just like to say thank you for this, and I appreciate you, Mr. Chairman, for wanting to figure out what's TPB's role in furthering it. And I would say that given that the COG board is going to consider this at its October meeting a week before the TPB meeting, I would be happy to get on with you and members of the executive committee immediately after that meeting to share any necessary information in order for you to craft how you're going to handle this at our October meeting.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Sounds great. I appreciate that. I see if and help me out if I miss anybody's hands, just feel free to jump in here. I see Ann Wheeler, am I seeing your hand?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I just a comment, you know, it's a lot of great work, and obviously out here in Prince William County, we support the goals that COG has laid out with the terms of greenhouse gas reduction and housing and affordable housing. I just want to make sure that, you know, if you look at those maps, we don't have a lot of high capacity transit areas in Prince William County, and I'm, you know, and so we are in a little bit of a different situation. Not that we don't support doing land use around those, but I just want to give the example of really quickly. Last night, we approved a large town center with 2,000 homes, and it's not next to a high capacity transit center. It's near our GMU campus in Western Prince William County. But I will tell you that it's 3.5 miles from a VRE station, and we've already started studying how we get a connector bus from that town center to the VRE station. You know, so it may not be a high capacity transit station within a mile, but there are other ways that we're going to address doing land use out in Prince William County. We have 2 large commuter lots that are obviously with 2,000 spaces. We're taking cars off the roads, but they're not recognized as high capacity transit. I'm just going on the record for anyone who's listening to say that we will work in the best we can with these things. But we're all on board and do support the COG goals and whatever TPB does. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Chuck, look, you wanted to jump in real fast?
Yeah, thank you. Well, we're focusing on that 225 by 2030. That's really the floor. It's the beginning. It's not a ceiling. Conti, I think the definition is there's reasonable expectation of funding, construction, and being done by 2030 of this 225. If, you know, Governor X and County Y have an initiative the next couple of years, boy, wouldn't it be great if that 225 were 230 or 245, or if we stretched out our planning to the year 2035, what it could be. But I think the underlying principles of optimizing the land use around those systems, and particularly around a system of systems. So Mark VRE, Purple Line, WMATA, bus rapid transit can connect. So I see President of the Board of Commissioners of Charles County, and I wanted to get in that the 225 is not the floor. So if his aspiration is realized, that number will go up. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Dave Snyder, I see your hand up.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. 2 quick things. First of all, there's a major project for bus rapid transit that wasn't mentioned, connecting Alexandria, the City of Falls Church, through Arlington and Tyson's Corner. And it will have both equity and transportation benefits. The second point that I want to make is a larger point, which is we've made a great case in terms of non-financial, sort of budgeting arguments for this. I would add one more. If you can spend $1 and achieve equity, climate, and other objectives, you've really made an excellent, best possible use of taxpayer money. So I'd like to see a little bit more talk and discussion and support for the positive efficiency and good use of the taxpayers' money argument, in addition to the other goals that we've set forward for this. Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck.
I would echo Councilmember Snyder's point, and we will look to weave that in. I think as we go forward in the next year or two, there's also some positive peer pressure that can be employed to reach some of these goals. As we think about the land use around high capacity transit, I'm often referring to the full moon walk shed. So there's a beautiful half-mile radius around that. If there's not a half-mile beautiful full moon walk shed around one of the WMATA stations, well, that city or that county better get to work, because we're all putting in this investment and it's not being optimized if we don't have a walk shed, a beautiful walk shed, for example.
Yeah, and I would just add one more significant joint jurisdictional project in Northern Virginia around the West Falls Church station involving Metro, Fairfax County, the city of Falls Church. Anyway, thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Snyder. I see Mr. Collins and Ms. Newton, so I'm going to turn to them kind of as the final comments on this section. I just want to be cognizant of time, so we make sure that we've got time for our what'll be a pretty big presentation and discussion, I think, on a climate change mitigation study. But Mr. Collins, let me turn to you, and then Ms. Newton after that.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll be very brief. I think Mr. Bean, he kind of anticipated where my comments would go. Mr. Snyder was a part of a work group that was convened by Mr. Dorsey during the COG leadership retreat. And I raised some of these issues at that point. Looking, in hindsight, as a jurisdiction, Charles County is totally on board with the concept of EEAs as a mechanism to kind of address, how we move forward, establishing priorities for transportation and how we utilize government resources. But this is a suggestion, and during the course of our COG meetings, I will be making this point even further. I am looking forward to the establishment of the actual resolution that can be incorporated into Charles County's future policy initiatives, that are consistent with the whole concept of the EEAs. Now, I wanted to also kind of look at it from the perspective of where we're separated from most of the jurisdictions that are part of COG. Many of the jurisdictions that are part of COG, are in terms of actual density and population. You're at a point where a lot of your work is dealing with redevelopment, which is, not necessarily where Charles County is fully. And so and on the staff level, in terms of planning, if you could start assisting jurisdictions such as Charles County, that is in a mode where we're anticipating, where we are uniquely as one of the jurisdictions within, COG, to look at best practices, look at it from the perspective of best practices, anticipating the impact, anticipating where we're connecting our various transportation systems, anticipating, the importance of high capacity transit, because we have it in our planning. But, in terms of where COG is in terms of recognizing that, we're not there yet. But our planning has been consistent with that for over 10 years now. And so it would be helpful for me, because I very quickly, I presented to Charles County staff that we begin the process of establishing a task force to actually look at the implementation of a plan, addressing, the maps that have been put in place, through the equity emphasis areas. And so any help coming from COG to assist us in kind of anticipating what that looks like and, to help facilitate, that would be very appreciative. So we are totally in agreement with the idea and the concept, but I just wanted to share, that nuance.
Yeah, thank you. Do my best with the quick answer. Fastest way we get there is through peer learning. So County X has that template that's taken from the regional and put it in their own city or county. Make sure that we're sharing that. We do one-off technical assistance with jurisdictions. We're doing several on climate, energy, and action plans with several counties. I think Mr. Collins, what you're talking about, I think it would be a follow-up discussion with Conti. More broadly, focusing on equity, we're starting our second cohort with GARE, acronym Government Alliance for Race and Equity. So 100 people from about 12 jurisdictions went through last year, and we have 125 people from another 14 jurisdictions starting this month. So it gives the lens to think about why is this census tract like that and these other census tracts like that? What are the opportunities for change? So that's more broad, but we're looking to have that regional learning cohort more broadly, even as we have subject matter experts dip into these areas specifically.
Thanks, Chuck. All right, and Ms. Newton, I'm going to turn to you to help bring it home, and then we'll move to our next agenda item after that.
Well, it's kind of fortuitous that you said bring it home, because I think that what happened this morning in the city of Rockville speaks to the Fab Four, because we had groundbreaking this morning on the BF-SAW Twin Brook Corridor project. It's about 18.5 acres. We'll bring almost 2,000 units. Almost 300 of them will be MPDUs, 3,500 jobs, and it is adjacent to the Twin Brook Metro and will be on the other side of the BRT on Rockville Pike when that comes too. So it really does, in my opinion, and to your point, Mr. Chairman, it's taken 10 years. 10 years for the SAW company to assemble the properties and 6 years for the mayor and council to adjust our zoning, create a program for champion projects, which meet or exceed several of our metrics in the city, public open space, affordable housing, adjacent to transit, all of those things that are so important to all of us. So I want to say thank you, Chuck, to you for your leadership, and Charles, to you for yours, because I think what we've learned over the years really brought it home in Rockville today. So thanks.
Thank you. And if I could, Mr. Chairman, great anecdote, great example, Mayor Newton. And I think driving home the point that these planning concepts are not just the district or the urban core. In fact, the 2020 census revealed that the densest census tract in the region is actually in Arlington, East Ballston. And Vice Chair Dorsey, correct me if I'm wrong, but a couple of decades ago, there was a bus parking lot there, and there were used car lots there, and that transformation to become the densest census tract in the region, vital. I think hitting all those notes. I think apply that to the Woodbridge, VRE, Mark Station opportunities in Frederick and the others. So these are opportunities for all 225 nodes. And all 350 equity emphasis areas.
Excellent, thanks. Well, I didn't plan it that way. That was an excellent way to help wrap up that part of the conversation. So thank you very much. And Chuck, thanks so much for your work again, walking us through this. And then I think we'll kind of to your earlier comments around having TPB take a similar type of action or endorsement. I'll talk with the executive officers and Conti and team. We'll perhaps bring that forward at next month's agenda and make sure we notice that for everybody. But all right, thank you very much. We are going to now move to our next agenda item. We are right on target for our agenda. And we had left most of our time today to be able to focus on this topic on agenda item number 10, which is our TPB climate change mitigation study, both to reflect the content that we've got, as well as the importance and urgency on this topic in just about everything that we do. Transportation planning included. So I trust that everyone has been able to review and read the read-ahead materials that were provided. What I'm going to do is turn to Mark Moran on our staff to tee up the presentation, as well as Michael Grant, who is the lead consultant, to be able to walk us through this. They're going to make opening remarks in a presentation, and then what we're going to do is turn to a little bit of discussion before we hit the end of our agenda. So Mark, let me turn to you, I think, first, correct?
Thank you. Yes. Good afternoon. Late last year, while discussing the region's ability to attain COG's 2030 and 2050 greenhouse gas reduction goals, the TPB asked two questions. First, what level of VMT would be needed to attain these goals? And second, what % of our motor vehicle fleet should be converted to clean energy to attain these goals? In response to these questions, TPB staff initiated at the beginning of 2021 the Climate Change Mitigation Study, or CCMS. Phase 1 of the study, conducted by TPB staff, is now complete and concluded with a report summarizing major findings from past work done in this area by both COG and TPB. The report findings were presented to the TPB on May 19th. Phase 2 of the CCMS, which began in the spring, is a scenario study conducted by COG TPB's Transportation Planning On-Services Consultant, ICF. Phase 2 began with a literature review of climate action plans and strategies to reduce transportation sector greenhouse gas emissions. In July, the literature review was finalized and shared with both the Tech Committee and the TPB. The study is currently in the analysis phase. As part of this phase, ICF conducted a high-level analysis containing a few top-down scenarios that answered the questions that were posed by the TPB last year. The draft findings will be shared with the board today. Based on the findings from the top-down scenario, the study team realized the importance of examining specific strategies for achieving reductions in VMT and conversion of the vehicle fleet. The team also recognized the importance of determining the levels of implementation needed to achieve the greenhouse gas reduction goals. So the team developed a set of 10 bottom-up scenarios that combine various strategies, assume different levels of implementation. The plans for the bottom-up scenarios will also be shared with you shortly. The final report is due to the TPB by December, so the consultant only has about 2.5 months left. Since we knew there would be limited time to conduct the analysis, we have crafted the scenarios to provide a good combination of different strategies with varying levels of implementation, many of which are very aggressive. We have already received comments from the Tech Committee that we are currently reviewing. Given the limited time, we're most interested in your thoughts on any adjustments to the strategies contained within the scenarios, but we do not anticipate being able to add additional scenarios. Note that these scenarios generally focus on broad policies and investments and do not include analysis of individual transportation projects. Please provide any comments or suggestions to Michael Grant with a CC to me by Friday close of business. And with that, I'll turn it over to Michael Grant.
Thank you, Mark. I'm very pleased to be here to give you a status update and share some of these findings. There's a lot to go through, so I'll go through materials quite quickly, but hope to have some time for questions and answers. I hope you can see the slide presentation that's up. Just as a quick note, following up on what Mark said, the focus of our study here is on-road transportation sources or surface transportation. You may recall the Climate Energy Action Plan addressed all sectors of the economy, and there are different potentials for greenhouse gas reduction across different sectors. Our focus here is specifically looking solely at transportation and what the ability of transportation strategies to achieve the 50% and 80% reduction goals. As Mark noted, there's been quite a bit of work already conducted, including the phase 1 effort by TPB staff. And then our team at ICF has been busy at work conducting a literature review and then identifying the scenarios and tools and models to use for the analysis, which I'll be highlighting today. So first, just as an important key early step in this study completed in July was the literature review. And this literature review was intended to help understand what's currently happening in the region, what other cities, states, and countries across the world are doing in terms of transportation greenhouse gas reductions, and to help understand the effectiveness of transportation strategies. The purpose of this review was to provide a basis to identify the strategies that we would consider in the scenario analysis. This next slide shows you that through the literature, we see 3 primary pathways to reduce transportation greenhouse gas emissions. Looking at the bottom in the boxes in black, you can see that transportation greenhouse gas emissions are really a function of 3 components: vehicle travel activity or vehicle miles traveled, energy efficiency, which may be expressed in different ways, often in terms of fuel economy or miles per gallon, and also the carbon intensity of fuel, which varies based on the type of fuel used. In the case of electric vehicles, while these are zero emissions vehicles from the tailpipe, we look at the carbon intensity of the electricity used by those vehicles from the power sector as part of the contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. The transportation strategies then to reduce greenhouse gas emissions focus on one or more of these components. And we often look at these in 3 primary pathways: mode shift and travel behavior strategies, which focus on reducing the amount of vehicle travel; transportation system management and operation strategies, which focus on improving vehicle operating conditions, such as reducing vehicle delay and vehicle idling to improve energy efficiency; and changes in vehicle technologies and fuels, such as shifts to hybrid and electric vehicles, which can improve fuel economy and move to lower carbon sources. When we conducted this extensive literature review, I mean, there clearly are some challenges in comparing studies out there, given that there are many differences in timeframes of studies, different types of strategies analyzed, different levels of aggressiveness of strategies, and different contexts for places in which these strategies are implemented. Still, the research generally provides us a good sense of some broad conclusions about the general effectiveness of transportation strategies and their role in contributing to significant greenhouse gas reductions. We see that vehicle technology and fuel strategies have a large potential for greenhouse gas reduction and are often cited as very necessary components of any plans for deep greenhouse gas reduction and decarbonization. Switching from a conventional vehicle to a battery electric vehicle is estimated to reduce greenhouse gas emissions per vehicle by about 73 to 76% in the region, based on the current power mix, after accounting for the electricity-related emissions. If we decarbonize the power grid, that increases the benefits further so that vehicles can truly become zero emissions vehicles when accounting for electricity generation as well. One of the primary constraints for achieving these reductions quickly is the rate of vehicle turnover, as most people hold on to their vehicles for many years, often 8 to 10 years or more. So given the rate of vehicle turnover, I mean, one study estimated potential for 15% transportation greenhouse gas reduction from the baseline in 2030, but very significant up to about 94% reduction in 2050 with shifts to electric vehicles and a cleaner grid. And a 2021 study by the National Academy of Sciences also noted the importance of electrification to nearly all deep decarbonization scenarios. Mode shift and travel behavior strategies are also identified as important strategies and can have meaningful effects on greenhouse gas reduction, but on their own are not expected to achieve the deep levels of greenhouse gas reductions. While individuals shifting from driving to walking or biking or other modes eliminates those emissions, at a regional scale, most studies estimate reductions of about 4 to 24% in vehicle travel compared to baseline forecasts, with the higher levels under more aggressive assumptions, often including significant policies related to road pricing and disincentives to driving. These reductions are generally presented in comparison to baseline forecasts for VMT, so I think that's important to note. So in many cases, we're looking at reductions off of an anticipated growth in VMT, and often you could look at this as a reduction in VMT per capita or VMT per person at a regional scale. Just as an example, the metropolitan planning organizations in California actually have targets set for reductions in passenger VMT per capita relative to 2005. And their targets generally for 2035 range from about a 13 to 19% reduction in per capita VMT. But with population growth in those regions, the overall forecast for VMT is not anticipated to decline under those plans. Yet they are significantly planning to reduce VMT compared to the originally forecast growth. So mode share and travel behavior strategies are often viewed as very important contributors to helping to keep vehicle travel from increasing over time. Some of the largest effects generally occur from or are seen in the research from pricing strategies such as vehicle travel, VMT fees that apply to all travel. These have broad application and create disincentives to driving. But there are many other strategies, and in particular land use strategies, as was even noted in the last presentation, are often seen as having very large effects depending on the level of development growth over time. And there tend to be smaller effects from other transportation investments, although there can be synergistic effects when you combine land use, transit, bike ped, and other types of strategies together. Transportation system management and operations strategies generally show quite small, or we'd say modest effects on greenhouse gas reductions at a regional scale. Most studies suggest up to a few % reduction in greenhouse gases, while there may be more notable effects on individual corridors, and some eco-driving studies have shown improvements in the fuel economy up to about 7%. At a regional scale, they tend to be relatively modest. Also, most studies are based on conventional fueled vehicles, and we anticipate that the benefits of system management strategies would decline as more vehicles transition to hybrids and electric vehicles. In addition to these important points from the literature, there's a few other items I wanted to note. Carbon pricing is identified in the literature as a cost-effective approach and strategy, and this may be in the form of carbon taxes, which are similar to fuel taxes, or cap and trade or cap and invest programs, as these strategies create economic incentives both to reduce vehicle travel and to encourage people to shift to more fuel efficient and electric vehicles. So these tend to have important effects. There are also strategies to address impacts on low income and moderate income residents as well. Another important point is that while we're talking and focused solely on transportation here, the electric grid plays an important role in transportation greenhouse gas emissions as more vehicles shift to electric vehicles. And so we look at the power sector as well. And in the power sector, there's a movement towards renewable fuels, more clean energy generation. And that movement towards zero carbon power is important in the overall transportation emissions. We also note important co-benefits and equity considerations for all of these strategies. Many of the strategies across all types have co-benefits in terms of cost savings, mobility benefits, accessibility benefits, safety, and public health improvements. And equity is an important consideration as well. Many strategies help to enhance access, and equitable access can be a key component of these strategies related to land use, transit, bike ped, and others. Some of the strategies like road pricing, carbon pricing, telework, and incentives for new vehicle purchases, which tend to be seen as very effective, can at times raise equity concerns and relating in particular to pricing and affordability for low-income households. But policies can be designed to help address those issues as well. So now on to some results. We looked at some analysis to address the questions that were posed by the TPB about what level of VMT reduction would be needed and what level of technology adoption would be needed to meet the goals if those pathways were explored on their own. We find that for the VMT reduction, to achieve the 2030 goal with VMT reduction alone, passenger vehicle travel would need to be reduced by about 57% from the 2018 level, which is the sort of most recent year we're using for the analysis. The reason that a more than 50% reduction is needed is that when we're looking at mode shift and travel behavior strategies, we're primarily focusing on shifting passengers from driving onto transit, rideshare, walking, and other options. But remember, there's a significant share of emissions that are generated by trucks used for freight, commercial deliveries, even trash collection, as well as buses. And so with all those vehicles out there, in fact, in 2018, over 1/4 of the transportation greenhouse gas emissions in the region came from commercial vehicles. We generally don't see many opportunities to reduce vehicle travel from commercial vehicles and from bus services. And as a result, passenger travel would need to be reduced by about 57% from the 2018 level and about 61% compared to the forecast level of VMT in 2030. As you can see in this graph on the side, current forecasts for VMT per capita show that VMT per person is forecast to decline over time under current plans, but this level of VMT reduction per capita and total VMT reduction would be extremely dramatic. It would really require unprecedented levels of VMT reduction to be achieved and sustained by 2030. And these are about as large as the reductions in vehicle travel we saw during the height of the COVID-19 stay-at-home orders in April 2020, when vehicle traffic volumes dropped temporarily by about 50%, while virtually all schools and non-essential businesses were told not to travel. And those figures have since recovered. A sustained level of vehicle travel at that level would be needed during a time when population is anticipated to increase by 12% by 2030. When we look at the 2050 greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal, it's not actually possible to get to the goal through passenger VMT reduction alone, since the commercial vehicle and bus emissions levels forecast for 2050 themselves significantly exceed the goal level of emissions. When we look at vehicle technology alone, we conducted this similar analysis. We used some very simplified assumptions, focusing solely on electric vehicle adoption and assuming proportionate adoption of electric vehicles across all vehicle classes, which is unlikely, but our scenario study will explore more scenarios for EV adoption. So this was just a very simple analysis of the issues. Still, we find a similar challenge for achieving the 2030 goal. Using a reference case for the carbon intensity of electricity generation based on current policies that are on the books, which include improvements compared to the electricity generation mix today, we see that the goal would require about 75% of the vehicles on the road to be electric vehicles by 2030. Under a scenario with a clean electric grid, a fully clean electric grid by 2035, still nearly half of the vehicles on the road would need to be electric vehicles to meet the goal. And so this is about 9 years away. And remember that people tend to hold on to their vehicles, for 8 to 10 years or more. President Biden has launched an ambitious target to get 50% of new light-duty passenger vehicles sold in 2030 to be electric vehicles. But in this case, we're talking about nearly half to 3/4 of the vehicles actually on our roadways being electric vehicles in 9 years. So you can imagine it's extremely ambitious and would likely require nearly immediate shifts to all new vehicles sold as electric vehicles and aggressive incentives to accelerate quicker vehicle turnover. You can see the 2050 goal actually cannot be achieved also through vehicle technology alone if we assume the current on the books pathway for carbon intensity for electricity. But under the case of a truly clean carbon grid, it would be possible to achieve the goals through technology improvements alone. By 2050, we would need nearly 80% of the vehicles on the road to be electric vehicles, which would potentially be feasible, assuming that electric vehicles take over nearly all of vehicle sales sometime after 2030. So you can see from both of these analyses, it's extremely challenging to look solely at transportation and see the goals being met individually through VMT reduction alone or through technology change alone. which leads us into the scenarios that we're planning to, that we're kind of in the process, we've developed and are in the process of beginning the analysis. We developed 10 scenarios that were built up considering different strategies, with 2 focused on vehicle technology and fuels, 3 focused on mode shift and travel behavior, 1 focused on system management and operations, and 4 that involve a combination of strategies. Based on the top-down analysis, we don't anticipate that any single pathway scenario can achieve the goals that are set out, but the combinations of strategies are what we're particularly interested in, and we see the layering of strategies resulting in a pathway towards the goals. So for each strategy we defined, or each scenario, we defined strategies and have different levels of stringency associated with some of these strategies. And I will say that we have sort of a base level and amplified levels of strategies in these scenarios, but we believe all of the scenarios are quite ambitious and aggressive. I'll run through these just very quickly and hopefully leave a little time for questions. We have 2 scenarios for vehicle technology and fuels, reflecting different levels of adoption of electric vehicles. And we have different assumptions for different vehicle types. Just as an example, under our first scenario, we assume 50% of light-duty vehicle sales in 2030 are electric vehicles, which conforms with President Biden's national goal, and that ramps up quickly to 100% in 2040. In our second, more aggressive scenario, we assume that 100% of new light vehicle sales in 2030 are EVs, which is even more aggressive than recent targets set in California. We also assume sort of incentives to increase the rate of vehicle fleet turnover. In our mode shift and travel behavior scenarios, we have 3 different scenarios, each of which has increasingly aggressive sets of strategies and assumptions. We do include strategies about land use changes, which include shifting growth to the high capacity transit areas, as well as adding households to the region to improve jobs housing balance, consistent with some of what we heard earlier in the discussion. And although this adds more households to the region, previous analyses suggest that this strategy alone would help to reduce trip lengths and reduce VMT overall for the region. And I will also note that the strategies include strategies around transit fare reductions, increases in telework, workplace parking, improvements in transit services, as well as road pricing. We've layered these strategies together so that they have sort of aggressive strategies, even more aggressive. And then in the third scenario, we've added on road pricing strategies. We've received some feedback from the technical committee to shift some of the road pricing strategies into our second scenario and move some of the more aggressive strategies, like for telework, into our third scenario, with the thought that some of the road pricing, like cordon pricing, may be even more feasible than some of the most aggressive telework and transit strategies. And then finally, we have our system management operations scenario. I won't touch too much on that, but that will address some of the improvements in efficiencies. And then we do have the combined scenarios, which layer together the other scenarios. And in our first combination, we utilize the sort of base scenarios for all of these vehicle technologies and mode shifts. We have a second combination that uses a more aggressive technology focus. We have a third combination that uses the most aggressive mode shift assumptions, including road pricing. And the fourth combination uses the most aggressive scenarios across all of the pathways. And we also plan to include some additional assumptions about a shared connected automated vehicle future in 2050 that not only helps to optimize traffic flow, but reduces vehicle travel further by encouraging high levels of ride sharing on shared connected automated vehicles. We do have, as part of this scenario analysis, a sensitivity analysis looking at the electric grid, because we know that the electric grid decarbonization has an important impact. So that's part of the scenarios we have here, with 3 basically kind of sensitivities looking at how the power sector will affect the overall net emissions. And then I just touched briefly on the tools we're using for the analysis. These are primarily sketch planning tools and models. These use kind of broad sketch analysis tools. We're using limited analysis of the regional travel model based on the time frame for the study, but these are all robust tools that enable us to look at a range of strategies and then combine them together through development of a spreadsheet model that looks at the combined effects. So with that, just note we feel a strong set of scenarios to explore these impacts. There certainly is, we see a key challenge ahead of the region, but look forward to kind of really identifying those combinations of scenarios that can help to meet the goals. With that, I'll turn to questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. Let me do this, recognizing that we have about 10 minutes. I'll say two things. One is that if anybody has any specific suggestions for staff to consider, you can please feel free, of course, to email those to Conti or Mark this week. I would also say, because we have the chat function going on, I want to make sure, and TPB staff will make sure we record all these. If you've got additional comments or questions that we're not going to be able to get to because we only have 10 minutes here, drop them in the chat, and that way Conti and TPB staff will collect those so that we've got those comments as well. I'm going to ask one quick question, and again, we'll try to move these quickly. And that is, as you look at the different scenarios, are you in any way breaking them out by jurisdiction? What I mean by that is, let me think, for example, electric vehicle charging. The charging needs, for example, in an urban core, and the infrastructure is going to be perhaps different than in in the suburban infrastructure. Are you distinguishing between that, or just looking just one region and that's it?
Most of the analysis is really just fully regional in nature. We're not breaking out by jurisdiction. We do have the one strategy of cordon pricing, which is focused on the parts of the District of Columbia, so that analysis is a little more geographic specific, as well as some of the land use assumptions that we have, but all of the results are just provided at a regional scale.
Okay, I appreciate it. To TPB staff, because we're screen sharing the presentation, I can't see anybody else out there at the moment, so I can't see if there are hands going up or not.
Oh, I can stop sharing.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I see a bunch of hands going up, so again, I'll do my best to move quickly here. I think Dave Marsden, I think I saw your hand up, and then Mayor Rochelle, and then Earl Lewis.
Thank you very much. This is Dave Marsden from the Virginia Senate, Chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee. And just an interesting event took place yesterday. I was visited by a group who are working in Oklahoma to create a 50-mile in any direction program of supercharging stations, 7 to 10 minutes to charge your car. And they're interested in coming into Virginia. And they're not focusing on urban and suburban areas. They're focusing more on the rural, underserved areas, which I think is fairly exciting and matches up to the Clean Car Act that we put in place in Virginia. But it is a long-term strategy of investment, because they're not going to see an immediate return on that. But they're banking on a strong EV car future, and that they are establishing themselves, or they want to establish themselves around the state with a 50-mile interval between, and we're not just talking interstates, they're talking anywhere you live in the Commonwealth of Virginia, you're 50 miles from a charging station, which is, for rural areas, is fairly significant. Just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Great. Thank you. Mayor Rochelle, I think I saw you next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Allen. Regarding the road pricing, does the pricing scenario that you have in mind take into consideration that those in the service industry drive more than those who have the luxury of telework?
I think these are all issues that, as we noted with equity, we will want to highlight. I think for the analysis, we're using fairly simple application of the pricing across the roadway network, just for purposes of modeling and analysis. But those are all important considerations in terms of ultimate strategy implementation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, I think I had seen your hand up next. I think you're muted, Mr. Lewis.
There we go. I second the comments. Many of the comments already been made. As among my many duties, I'm also chair of Maryland Zero Emission Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Council for the last nearly 6 years. And I think Mr. Marsden's comments related to making sure that we have enough recharging infrastructure in rural areas, but in addition, urban and multifamily, lower middle income recharging infrastructure is going to be critical for the ability of citizens, especially, to be able to buy confidently EVs and allow them to and be confident they'll be able to recharge them and use them. I mean, obviously there's lower life cycle costs and fuel costs right now. So there's lots of incentives, I think, that'll get people to buy them, but they won't be able to if they can't recharge them. So that's really an important issue, and it's going to need significant capital investment to us to realize what I think many of us think needs to happen over the coming years.
Yeah, I agree, Mr. Lewis. That was my first question too. Is also, I do think it'd be helpful for us to think about how, obviously we're all different jurisdictions, and if you're in a high density, residential building or in an urban setting where you don't have a whole lot of real estate, the infrastructure is going to be different than in a suburban setting or a rural setting or other spaces. So I'd be curious to think that through. But I completely agree with you. The infrastructure has got to be a big part of the conversation.
I think the one positive that our region has is that we've got political leadership that's supportive of moving in this direction in all 3 jurisdictions, which is going to be very helpful. As we know, not the entire country has that.
True point. I saw Mr. Phillips' hand go up. Let me turn to Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, Chair Allen. Hopefully my microphone's working this time. Yep. I just wanted to reiterate at this board meeting a comment that we delivered at the tech committee meeting, and that is we think the analysis is fantastic. You've done a lot of great work here, and you have very smart scenarios. In the top-down analysis, you've shown us what it looks like if we only try to reduce VMT and what it looks like if we only focus on electric vehicle adoption. We do think it would be really helpful for everyone to see a third top-down scenario that says, if we can hit the electric vehicle adoption rates from the climate action plan that we've all passed and approved, then what level of VMT do we have to hit? So I'm going to make that request here. And also, just to food for thought, months from now, when we see the results of the scenario analysis, we should start thinking about what the next step is. Do we use that to set targets or guidelines for the long range plan and the tip? But that's kind of the utility of this work. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Alan, just one quick observation. I'm so glad you invited members to share their comments and questions in the chat. We are collecting those. That's excellent feedback. Everything I'm reading so far are very insightful questions associated with how we would implement any one of these strategies. This study is going to try and determine a set of strategies and what their potential are. We have intentionally not asked ourselves, is this even realistic? How hard it would be to implement? Because that was not the question for us. So those are important questions. Seeing them allows us to make them part of the report where this is the next steps that Mark was talking about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's a great point, Conte. Thank you. And yeah, thanks to everybody who's already dropped in comments and questions here, because we're going to run out of time here in just a second. So glad to see that. Dave Snyder, I saw your hand up.
Thanks very much. I guess my question is, what's next when, and keeping in mind that this board voted for an intermediate long-range plan in the next, 2 years? So the clock is ticking. And so Conti, maybe, or Mr. Chair, what's the time frame and how are we going to actually put this into play?
I'll try to be brief in my response, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Snyder, excellent question. One of the first steps we'll be doing, the reason we are pushing for this report in December, is to take these findings from the scenarios with the board's input on the policy priorities and actually documenting it into the long range plan so that it becomes our written goal for the next update. The next update is 2 years away, but I would say 2 years away, but that is hardly any time, because the question that we as staff will be coming back to each of you in the member jurisdictions at the member agencies is, now that you know what is needed, what project would you propose to implement for which you already have secured funding? That is not something the TPB as a body can select. We can't select the projects. We can't appropriate funding for a project. That has to come from the 23 jurisdictions. So that would be the focus of the next 2 years. I'm hoping that this study and the results will inform decision-making at local and sub-regional levels and at the state level. Where is the state willing to put its resources to help attain some of this? You will see in the results extremely aggressive strategies, levels of implementations, and that is intentional because we want to hit those targets. We do not want to be artificially constrained by what may or may not be feasible.
Thank you for putting that on the record. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, I think I don't see any other hands that have popped up unless I'm missing them on my screen. And I see we have several really great comments, as Conti said, in the comments in the chat section. And recognizing that it is right at 2 o'clock, why don't we do this? To Mr. Grant, thank you very much for the presentation. Like a lot of people have commented, just appreciate the level of detail there. And then Conti, I think you've laid out some of our next steps here. If there's anybody who has further questions, comments, clarifications upon reflection, I think if we send those by email to Conti, we can get those out to the right team members and have that incorporated as well. So if that works for you, Conti, you gave me a thumbs up, so I'm assuming that works as well. So thanks. All right, well then everybody, I'm gonna say thank you. It's a couple of minutes after 2, so I appreciate it. Thanks everybody for your time today. Hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your week. And with that, our next meeting is scheduled for October 20th, 2021. So keep your eyes out for more information to come on that. But otherwise, this meeting is now adjourned. Thanks everybody and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
You too.
Thanks, everybody.